Sweet. Well, for everyone that doesn't know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do and your history with dietetics?
Yeah, so I'm Julianne Mahoney. I'm a registered dietitian. I specialize in sports nutrition and intuitive eating, specifically eating disorders. And I have a degree in dietetics and one in exercise physiology from Florida State. And then registered dietitian is like a protected term. So I had a internship, like a clinical internship, similar to what doctors do and nurses do. And then I have a national board certification. So that is what I do. I probably just forgot a lot of things, but
I feel like you've said it enough times where it just comes out naturally. I'm like, well, these are all my titles and this is how I got here. So, right?
I probably skipped a lot of things there, but yeah, I've been a dietitian for almost a year now, so still pretty new to the field, but I have worked in sports nutrition for 5 years, all throughout my undergrad at Florida State and then with University of Maryland during my internship, and I love sports nutrition.
Yeah. Okay, so for the people who don't know what intuitive eating is, why don't you describe what it is?
Yeah, intuitive eating is a non-diet approach to health, which sounds kind of weird. So it's an approach. It's not a diet, like eat this, eat that. It's more about the mindset around food. So most of what I do actually has very little teaching people about food or talking about food, but talking about how people think about food, their relationship with food, their relationship with their body and exercise, so that they can learn how to eat in a way that best suits themselves and have a positive relationship with food, with their body, and with exercise.
Yeah, perfect. When you wanted to get into nutrition, were you first interested in intuitive eating like right away, or were you interested in other things?
No, when I decided to go to college to become a dietitian, I solely wanted to do sports nutrition, which is currently very opposite to intuitive eating. Sports nutrition is you need 2 grams of this at this time, like times your kilograms, and it's very mathematical. It's very very inflexible, I'd say. And that was my original goal, was to go into collegiate or professional sports nutrition. And as I was learning about it, the more I realized it just didn't fit me. I had recovered from, oh, my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, so you cut out at, it wasn't healthy for you. Like sports nutrition wasn't healthy for you. You recovered from and then it cut out.
Oh, yeah, I had recovered from an eating disorder, and just seeing the way that these very strict rules were being placed on athletes, and not necessarily to their benefit, because a lot of the research done is great guidelines and kind of a baseline, but every body is different. Like every body is completely different. So how many grams works for this person is going to be completely different from how many grams work for that person. And that kind of rigid approach to sports nutrition wasn't really what I was looking for as a dietitian, and I didn't think it was how I could best help athletes around me. So yeah, I found intuitive eating junior or senior year, and I kind of got into it and started connecting the dots between how that could interact with sports nutrition, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think that nutrition and body image is different for kids today than it was in like generations past? So when we were kids or when our parents were kids, how do you think it's different?
Yeah, it's definitely way worse for kids now versus when we were kids, or, you know, our parents, because of social media, which I know everyone says, but it's true. You have those very defined images in your head from being on screens all day long. And when we were kids, like, yeah, there was social media, there was things around, we watched TV, we saw ads, but it wasn't quite to the same level that it is today. I mean, I didn't get social media until I was a senior in high school. And now kids are in like 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and they have access to these things. They have these internalized standards, basically, from seeing this image plastered all over the place. They have an idea in their head what they should be looking like, and most of us don't match up because the internet is not reality. People use filters and Facetune and things like that. And at a young age, you're very susceptible to internalize those things and just really try to change your body to fit those images. And you know, when our parents were kids, they didn't even have any of that. They might have had like magazines. Like body image struggles have been around for generations, and they definitely had the models and the magazines, but it wasn't as present. It wasn't consuming so much of their lives.
Yeah, I remember like when my little sister was born. She's 10 now, but when she was born, my mom and dad created like a Facebook account for her, and it was called like Marin, but my mom was the one who like ran it, and they would just upload a bunch of pictures to update like mom and dad, or like to update the family and friends, right? But now like my little sister, her main goal in life is she wants to become a YouTube star, and she wants to like post all of these music videos on YouTube, and she's talking to me about it and says like, well, I'm gonna have to wait a couple years because mom and dad say that like there's a lot of criticism that comes with posting your content online, and that's very true. But even today with the pandemic and everything being online, you're even more so criticized for what you look like virtually, which is so much different than what you look like in person. Yeah,
no, we're all pixelated. Like it's not our cameras distort everything. And I feel like, the pandemic has definitely kind of shifted how all of us are interacting, because this is the only image that a lot of us are putting out into the world. It's not like we're really talking or socializing out there. So what we're putting online and posting online is kind of becoming our identity, which is really false because you only get to put one picture online. Like no one is out there, not a lot of people are out there actually sharing like real life updates. Like this is the full picture. Usually we take this little perfect Snapchat of our lives and that's what we present forward, which isn't always representative of the whole.
Yeah, no, definitely. Why do you think it's important to talk about nutrition and body image with youth, with kids at a young age?
Yeah, well, everything, this sounds so scary. I told my sister this when she had a baby, but everything that we do talking about our bodies and with food around our kids from the time that they are born all the way for the rest of their lives impacts them. So if you are restricting your 1-year-old's like cookie intake and hiding chocolate from them and things like that, those are things that get internalized. The way that you speak about your food and your body are things that they internalize, and they make their choices based on those things. So just the way we talk about food around our kids from the times they're like babies impacts how they feel about food and their bodies. So honestly, if you grow up, like I personally grew up with a mother who does not like her body. She still doesn't like her body. And listening to her criticize herself her whole entire life made me think, if she doesn't think she's good enough, then I'm obviously not good enough. Like my body is bigger than hers. It's different than hers. And if we don't talk about kids, about our own struggles, about how we can nourish our bodies in a positive way and kind of open up intuitive eating and just a positive experience, there's so many other things that they hear outside of the house. It's going to be hard for them to battle that, because you can have a perfect environment inside your house, a very loving body image, teaching them body neutrality, body positivity, self-acceptance. You can teach them that there's no food morality, there's no good or bad foods, all food is nourishing, and you can teach them all these things. But then they go to school, or they go to soccer, or they go to whatever clubs they're in, and not everyone's raised that way, and they hear, you know, other kids talking about bodies and criticizing other kids' bodies, and especially in high school, like hating on food or things in health classes, which are usually super toxic. And if we're not creating a positive kind of baseline that they know what's true for them, and they can kind of tune all of that out and leave it, they're going to be very susceptible to eating disorders. Eating disorder rates in adolescents are like skyrocketing in the past couple of years versus what it was even like 10, 15 years ago. So to protect protect our children and protect our adolescents just talking about it and normalizing it, because often that's the hard part, is kids that are preteens or teenagers aren't really open with their parents. Like, I know I wasn't open with my parents. It tends to be the time in our lives that we want to be normal, and we aren't really close to our family. So then it becomes a really easy thing to hide, and it can go on for years and years and years with all of these really negative consequences. And no one really knows about it because it's not a normal thing, and you don't want to bring it up so that you're not the one that's like left, you know, you're not the different one. If that makes sense. That's
no, absolutely. Yeah, you talked about like the negative influences that we get from PE or health. And it just reminds me of this one health class that we had in middle school where we all had to step on the scale. And it was like a measure of, all right, we're going to learn how to measure our BMI, right? And so everyone had to step on the scale, which is in the center of the room, front and center. And we all had to go in a line, and the teacher would tell us, okay, this is how much you weigh. Next person, this is how much you weigh. Problem was the scale was off by 15 pounds. It like weighed everyone 15 pounds more than they actually were. And then you get afterwards, and people, the girls were like, oh my God, I'm so heavy. And the guys were like, yeah, I'm bulk. And they were comparing scores of like, okay, what did you get? What did you get? And everyone was saying what they weighed. And so if you didn't say something, then you felt like, I'm hiding something. Or like the guiltiness of it. And I just remember that being super toxic.
Yeah, especially because BMI has no validity at all. BMI is a number that a mathematician, like the scale was came up by a mathematician who said this should not be used for healthcare purposes. He like made it based off of white European males, which is why it's very inaccurate for people of color, for women, especially for children. Like, it just doesn't match majority of our bodies, because there is not a normal body or an average body. Like, we all have different healthy weights. It's different for each person, and you can't really put that on a scale. But no, I remember that health class, and I was like, why are we doing this right now?
Yeah, I don't remember many people that were super happy with that particular lesson.
Yeah, this is a very sensitive thing, and even though all bodies are good bodies and weight really means nothing, and it does not have an indication of health, at a young age, those things can be really important. You don't want to be outside of the normal. It can be really hard to be in a body that's different from what's considered ideal. And yeah, doing that publicly is really hard. They made us do that in college too for exercise physiology. We had to do like the skin fold test. So you'd be in like a sports bra and like spandex in a glass room in the middle of this building, and you'd be like on a treadmill while people were like measuring your body, or like in a dunk tank for hydraulic weighing, and then the whole class would calculate things. And I'm like, it's vital to know how to do these things to become an exercise physiologist. Like, there are tests that we run, just like VO2 max and things like that. But it can be really vulnerable and really difficult as someone that struggles with body image to have to do that publicly. Yeah, those numbers can still hold weight even if you aren't relying on them, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, it does. You mentioned that you had struggled with an eating disorder, still struggle with disordered eating, and that's what really got you to want to help women, specifically active women who are struggling with eating disorders. I also, as you know, also struggle with eating disorders, and the first eating disorder I got was when I was an adolescent in middle school. But when I was in middle school, I very much negated the fact that I had an eating disorder. I had no idea what they were. For me, it was about performing well in my sport. And so I pushed my body really, really far to the point where I was diagnosed with an eating disorder.
Yeah.
So how do we change the narrative and inform kids about what eating disorders are, and kind of inform them also about the eating disorders that are a little bit less known and also glorified?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it starts one at home. So talking to your kids about it and letting them know from a young age, because now there are research done that kids in elementary school, like as young as I think 6 years old so far is the youngest diagnosed case, are experiencing these things. So having those kind of open, candid conversations with your kids, because you're really protecting them. A lot of the times we don't want to expose them to these things, but their environment is really out of our control when they go to school. So having these open conversations about what eating disorders are, what it looks like, in your kids, because if they don't know what they look like, they're not going to know when they're starting to develop these symptoms. And then also in schools, so a lot of health classes need to be reformed, like across the board. A lot of the health teachers are underqualified to teach about things like nutrition or eating disorders. They have a very limited scale, and also a lot of the curriculum is developed by people that don't know what they're talking about, or are heavily influenced by diet culture, which is the ideology that our society runs off of, that thinness equals worthiness, that like thinness is the highest achievement. And that's often what we're taught in school, is that like, oh, you got to lose weight and you got to avoid these foods and things like that, which really is not true, and it's very triggering. But talking about these things and just kind of bringing it up so that we know what to look for. And then for the hidden ones, I think the biggest issue is that our society right now is like hyper focused on health. Like we all want to be super healthy, which is great. But the idea of what healthy means is like very skewed. Right now, healthy means like cutting out gluten and sugar and all of these things, and only drinking water and exercising like a ton every single day and never resting. And that's why often like orthorexia, eating disorders that are more focused on the health versus the weight, tend to get praised rather than pointed out. So usually I had orthorexia, and people were like, man, you work out for like an hour and a half before school? That's awesome. Like you're running 3 times a day, or you only eat carrots and nothing with more than 5 ingredients. Those were things that people were like, that is awesome that you're doing that. Like I could never, things like that. And that reinforces the behaviors, because people are like, oh, you're so healthy, you're doing great. I wish I could cut out sugar, things like that. But it's super disordered, and it's not really a well-known eating disorder. Usually people just think about anorexia, all of the other like binge purge, and there's a bunch like ARFID, like which is one about textures. Like there's all of these different types of eating disorders, and if you don't fit that kind of ideal that people have of a very thin white woman, it tends not to be recognized, which is extremely detrimental, because anyone can have an eating disorder. Like you can't see it. It's not the body that gives the diagnosis, it's the habits. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a little bit about orthorexia, and I think that really ties into the work that we're doing with youth and sports and athletics. So why don't you describe a little bit more about what exactly orthorexia is?
Yeah. The short and sweet of it is it's an obsession with being healthy to the point that it's unhealthy. So often orthorexia is paired with compulsive exercise as well. So it's this compulsive need to exercise, usually kind of an obsessive amount. So it's being able to have that like lack of control around exercise. It's something that you have to do. And then from a food aspect, it's trying to be the healthiest. It's often comes out of clean eating, which can be a very disordered mindset, so that you have to have clean food, you have to have healthy food, you have to have only pure food. So in severe cases of orthorexia, people are afraid of fruit, or people will be afraid of like wheat and grains and things like that. And it can get to the point that people are afraid to eat anything except for like water. Yeah. All of these things become kind of fear foods. We're afraid of what we're putting in our body might be harming our health. So we just keep on restricting and restricting and restricting to only safe foods that we think are making us healthy. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. I just want to jump in and talk about the correlation and relationship between nutrition and food safety.
Yeah.
So first, if you just want to like describe in your own words what food safety is, and then we can talk about afterwards some challenges that kids might face about eating healthy foods if they are food insecure.
Yeah. So food safety is just not having to worry about food. So in just food insecurity would even be like having to cut coupons or like really, really price shop, like going to multiple stores in order to get the food that we need at the price that we need. That's considered food insecurity. So not having ready access to food. Or simple access to food that you can just go buy the food you need and not really have to think about it. I forgot your second question.
For kids, yeah, it goes to, for kids today, eating healthy and having like healthy lifestyles while still being food insecure. So for kids, it would be solely relying on school meals to satiate them throughout the day, and potentially only having food as your school meal as like the main meal of your day.
Yeah. So food insecurity can be really hard for nutrition. There are a lot of nutritious foods that you can get on like food stamps and things like that. Like processed foods are just as nourishing for your body, like canned fruit versus fresh fruit or freeze-dried, things like that. But only having access to food during school, especially now when we're not going to school and not really having those programs, can be very difficult because you're not fueling your body properly, not getting that adequate level. Oh my God, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'm still recovering from the concussion. Sometimes my brain just like gives out on me. Yeah, thanks, soccer. Challenges of introducing healthy foods to kids that might have access to them. Yeah, I think a big part of this as well is kind of food shaming. So often the foods that people that are food insecure have access to kind of get bad reps. So a lot of the cheaper foods are thought of as bad or not as nourishing, and then tend not to eat them. I saw that a lot when I was working at MCPS with their food service, that a lot of the kids that were getting free breakfast or free lunch weren't actually eating all of their food because it was, that's not healthy. I'm only going to have this salad, things like that. And then just the general lack of nourishment, because before we can even talk about like macronutrients or any of those little things that help with sports, just a general level of energy is needed to maintain your growth, especially when you're a child. Like, you are growing so fast that if you're not getting enough energy to just maintain your body, harm will be done kind of oh my God, what is the word? Irreparably? That sounds right. Yeah, my brain, thank you. Challenges introducing healthy foods to kids that might not have access to them. Yeah, and then often when we do talk about how to feed our bodies in school, a lot of the foods that are promoted are foods that kids that are insecure don't have access to, like fresh fruit and fresh veggies. And then they are kind of in this mindset like, well, then I can't be healthy. Like, I don't have what I need. I can't do this. And they tend to kind of feel out of place, or that they're not going to be good enough. Kind of a hit to the self-confidence, I would say, on that.
Yeah, I feel like the food shame really ties in with your what you teach on intuitive eating with younger kids, is that really it's okay to eat the food that's available to you if it fills you up and gives you the energy to, one, perform in school, and then to hang out with your friends and to play sports. If it gives you that energy that you can then burn, again, as a kid, you burn so much because you're active so much of the time. But if you are having a view of this food that it's not good for you, or it's not good enough, then it's going to get in the way of you having energy to fuel you throughout the day.
Exactly. And all food is good food. Like my least favorite phrase is empty calories, because literally unless you're like eating styrofoam, like every food nourishes your body. Some foods nourish your body in one way, some foods nourish your body in another way, but your body can use any energy that you give it. So regardless of if you're eating like ho-hos or whatever those like snack foods are, or kale, like your body knows how to use that energy, and it is going to use it to keep you alive, to keep you moving, so that you can do the things that you want to do. And just because you're getting one nourishment versus another doesn't make it good or bad. It's just food. Food is just food.
Absolutely. That's great. All right, last question for you. What is one piece of advice that you wish you had when you were a kid, in terms of body image, in terms of health, in terms of self-esteem?
The one thing that I wish was that someone had taught me how to talk to myself. Because we all have this like inner critic voice in our head, and it's super detrimental. It turns into the food police. It makes us, question everything that we do, and makes us hate ourselves and hate our bodies and hate food. So I wish someone just told me to do the kind thing for myself. So whether that's, eating the food, or taking a rest day, or sleeping in, or not going to whatever party you committed to, just to do the kind thing, and speak kindly, speak gently to yourself. Because the way you talk to yourself matters. It affects the way that you see yourself, the way that you eat, the way that you move, the way that you even perform. Like I was so bad at lacrosse until my self-talk, I guess is a better word, switched to a more positive place. And then I was like, hey, I had this skill the whole time. I just thought I was terrible, so I performed terribly every week. And then when I thought like, hey, maybe you can be better, the next week I was like, amazing. So the way that we talk to ourselves affects everything in our lives. And life is hard enough when you're a kid, so like, might as well like have a kind voice to yourself every day.
Yeah. Hindsight is definitely 20/20. You forget as an adult because you learn skills better of like, I shouldn't talk to myself that way. That doesn't mean that you necessarily don't. You just know that you shouldn't. But then I think we like have a disconnect with the kids who are kids right now, that they're struggling with these thoughts at the very same moment, but they don't themselves understand why they're struggling with the thoughts, and they don't have the tools to help them through it. So it's definitely a tricky area to navigate, but if we could just all universally have better self-talk, I think that'd be
the world would be a lot better place.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about with this topic, Julianne.
Thank you for having me.